The humidity clung to everything in the small town of Tres Rios, nestled deep in the Atlantic forest of southeastern Brazil. It was the kind of night where the air felt thick enough to drink, where mosquitoes hummed their endless song, and where the darkness beyond the town's flickering streetlights seemed alive with secrets. Juliano Costa sat on the wooden porch of his modest house, running his calloused hands along the barrel of his rifle, a weapon he had inherited from his grandfather, a man who had taught him everything about tracking, survival, and respect for the land. 43 years old, Juliano had the weathered face of someone who had spent more nights under the stars than beneath a roof. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his hands bore the scars of 1,000 encounters with thorns, branches, and the occasional defensive swipe from cornered prey. He was known throughout Tres Rios as the best hunter in the region, a man who could read the forest like others read books, who could distinguish between the call of a howler monkey and the warning cry of a toucan with his eyes closed. Tonight, however, something felt different. His 3 dogs, Rex, a muscular Brazilian fila, Lua, a lean and nervous mixed breed with one blue eye, and Travão, an aging but still formidable hunting hound, had been restless since sunset. They paced the yard, whining softly, their ears pricked toward the wall of trees that began just 50 meters from Juliano's property. Rex, normally the boldest of the 3, kept pressing his body against Juliano's legs, seeking comfort in a way that was entirely unlike him. "What's wrong with you tonight?" Juliano muttered, scratching behind Rex's ears. The dog whimpered, a sound that sent an unexpected chill down Juliano's spine despite the oppressive heat. His daughter Isabella stepped out onto the porch carrying 2 tin cups of strong Brazilian coffee. At 19, she had her mother's delicate features and her father's stubborn determination. She had lost her mother to cancer 3 years ago, and since then, she and Juliano had formed an unbreakable bond, 2 survivors clinging to each other in the wake of devastating loss. "They've been like this all evening," Isabella said, handing him a cup. "Maybe there's a storm coming." Juliano glanced at the sky, clear and star-filled, no sign of rain. He shook his head. "It's not the weather." "Then what?" He didn't answer immediately. In the distance, beyond the tree line, he thought he heard something not quite a sound, but more like the absence of sound. The forest had gone quiet. No insects, no night birds, no rustling of leaves, just silence, heavy and expectant. "Papa, you're not thinking of going out there tonight, are you?" Isabella's voice carried a note of concern that made Juliano look up at her. "Why would I?" "Because you always get that look when you're thinking about the forest. And the dogs are scared, which means something's wrong." Juliano sipped his coffee, the bitter liquid doing nothing to settle the unease growing in his chest. He had hunted these forests for over 30 years, since he was barely a teenager following his grandfather through the undergrowth. He knew every trail, every river crossing, every place where wild boar liked to root, and where jaguars left their territorial marks on tree trunks. But tonight, the forest felt like a stranger. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Geraldo, his hunting partner and oldest friend. "You feel it too? The forest is wrong tonight. Meet me at the trailhead in 30 minutes. Bring the dogs." Juliano read the message twice. Geraldo was not a man given to superstition or drama. If he felt something was wrong, then something was genuinely wrong. They had hunted together for 25 years, had pulled each other out of dangerous situations more times than either cared to count. If Geraldo was calling him out at 11 o'clock at night, there was a reason. "I need to go check on something," Juliano said, standing up and heading inside to gather his gear. "Papa, no. Geraldo needs me. Something's happening in the forest. Might be poachers, might be an injured animal causing problems. Either way, we need to check it out." Isabella followed him inside, her face set in the same stubborn expression he often saw in the mirror. "Then I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." "You can't stop me. If something happens to you out there, I need to be able to help." They had this argument frequently. Isabella had been learning to track and hunt from her father since she was 12, could shoot almost as well as he could, and had the kind of courage that both terrified and amazed him. But the thought of bringing her into the forest tonight, when even the dogs were afraid, made his stomach tighten with dread. "Isa, please, I'm 19 years old, Papa. I'm not a child anymore. And you're not going to leave me here alone wondering if you're ever coming back. Just like I wondered with Mama in that hospital." The mention of her mother silenced him. He looked at his daughter, her jaw set, her eyes fierce. Sand saw not the little girl he had taught to identify animal tracks, but a young woman who had already faced loss and survived it. Who was he to deny her the right to stand beside him? "Fine," he said quietly. "But you follow my lead, you stay close, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments, understood?" "Understood." They gathered their equipment, rifles, flashlights, first aid kit, water, knives, and rope. Juliano loaded his backpack with practiced efficiency, checking each item twice. The dogs clustered around them, still agitated but seeming to sense that action was coming. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent. We're going," Juliano muttered. They stepped off the porch and into the humid night. The walk to the trailhead took 15 minutes through the quiet streets of Tres Rios. past houses with darkened windows and the occasional bark of a distant dog. The town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something it couldn't name. Giraldo was already there when they arrived, leaning against his battered pickup truck. He was a few years older than Giuliano, with a completely bald head and a thick black beard that was more gray than he liked to admit. His own dog, a rangy mutt named Sombra, sat alert at his feet. "You brought Isabella," Giraldo said. It wasn't a question. She insisted. Giraldo nodded slowly, studying the young woman. "Your grandfather would be proud. You've got his eyes, sharp and fearless." He turned to Giuliano. "3 farmers called me tonight. All of them saying the same thing. Their livestock are going crazy, dogs won't stop barking, chickens won't settle. And everyone says the forest has gone quiet." "We noticed," Giuliano said, gesturing to his nervous dogs. "There's more. Joe Amende, you know him, owns that cattle ranch on the eastern edge. He swears he saw something moving through his pasture around sunset. Something big, bigger than a jaguar," he said, but moving on 2 legs. Isabella's eyes widened. "A person?" "That's what we need to find out," Giraldo said grimly. "Could be poachers. Could be someone lost or injured. Could be nothing. Joel's eyes aren't what they used to be. But with all the other signs, ... He left the sentence hanging. Giuliano checked his rifle one more time, then looked at the dark mouth of the trail leading into the forest. The trees seemed to lean inward, as if listening to their conversation. "Let's go. Stay together. Keep the dogs close." "We checked the main trails first, look for tracks or signs of disturbance." They entered the forest in single file, Giraldo in front with Sombra. Then Giuliano with Rex, Lua, and Trovaio, and finally Isabella bringing up the rear. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, creating stark shadows that seemed to dance and shift with every movement. The temperature dropped noticeably as soon as they were under the canopy, and the air smelled of damp earth, rotting leaves, and something else. Something sharp and almost metallic that Giuliano couldn't quite identify. The dogs moved cautiously, heads low, constantly sniffing the ground. Rex kept looking back at Giuliano, seeking reassurance. Lua's blue eyes seemed to glow in the flashlight beam, giving her an otherworldly appearance. Travao, the oldest and most experienced, stayed close to Isabella, his protective instincts overriding his nervousness. They walked for 20 minutes, following the main trail deeper into the forest. The silence was profound, broken only by their footsteps and breathing. No insects, no night birds, no rustling of small mammals in the undergrowth. It was as if every living thing had fled or was hiding, waiting for some terrible danger to pass. Then Rex stopped abruptly, his body going rigid. He stared at something off the trail, a low growl building in his chest. The other dogs immediately responded, forming a defensive semicircle, their hackles raised. "What is it, boy?" Giuliano whispered, raising his rifle and sweeping his flashlight across the trees. There, about 10 meters off the trail, the undergrowth had been disturbed. Broken branches, torn leaves, deep gouges in the soft earth. Giuliano moved closer, his heart pounding. The gouges looked like they had been made by something dragging itself along the ground, or by something being dragged. "Giraldo," he called softly. "You need to see this." Giraldo and Isabella joined him, their flashlights illuminating the disturbed area. Isabella gasped. "Papa, is that... is that blood?" Dark stains marked the leaves and bark of a fallen tree. Giuliano knelt down, touching the substance with his fingertip. It was still slightly tacky, not yet dried. Fresh. Maybe an hour old, maybe less. "Something was injured here," he said. "Something big, judging by the amount of blood and the trail it left." "What kind of animal bleeds like this?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Giuliano didn't answer because he honestly didn't know. He had seen jaguar kills, had tracked wounded boar and deer, had even once stumbled upon the aftermath of a territorial fight between 2 male howler monkeys. But this was different. The blood pattern was wrong, too, spread out, too much of it. And there was that smell again, stronger, now metallic and sharp, mixed with something organic that reminded him uncomfortably of fierce sweat. "We follow it," Giraldo said, his voice grim. "Whatever left this trail is hurt badly. If it's an animal, we need to put it out of its misery. If it's a person... double quotes, he didn't finish the sentence. If it was a person, they were probably already dead. They began to follow the trail of blood and disturbed undergrowth, moving slowly and carefully. The dogs remained agitated, but no longer seemed as terrified. As if the presence of an obvious threat, something that could bleed and leave tracks, was less frightening than the earlier inexplicable silence. The trail led them off the main path, and deeper into the forest, into areas that Giuliano rarely visited. The canopy grew thicker here, blocking out even the faint starlight that had been filtering through before. Their world narrowed to the circles of illumination from their flashlights, everything beyond that reduced to impenetrable darkness. After another 15 minutes, Giraldo held up his hand, signaling them to stop. He pointed ahead where his flashlight beam had caught something reflective, 2 points of light, low to the ground, that vanished as soon as he moved the beam away. "Eyes," he breathed. "Something's watching us." Giuliano felt his pulse quicken. He raised his rifle, clicking off the safety. Beside him, Isabella did the same, her hands steady despite the fear he could sense radiating from her. As the dogs pressed close to them, growling but not barking, as if they too understood the need for stealth. "Show yourself," Geraldo called out, his voice carrying through the silent forest. "We're not here to hurt you. If you need help, we can help." Nothing, just darkness and silence. Then, from somewhere to their left, came a sound that made every hair on Giuliano's body stand on end. It started as a low moan, almost human but not quite, rising in pitch and volume until it became a shriek that echoed through the trees, a sound of pain and rage and something else that Giuliano's mind refused to process because it sounded too much like words, like someone trying to speak through a throat that had forgotten human language. The dogs erupted in frantic barking. Rex lunged forward, only Giuliano's iron grip on his collar keeping him from charging into the darkness. Sombra cowered against Geraldo's legs, whimpering. Travail positioned himself in front of Isabella, teeth bared, ready to defend her with his life. And then the sound cut off abruptly, leaving them in ringing silence. "What in God's name was that?" Isabella gasped, her face pale in the flashlight beam. "I don't know," Giuliano admitted, his mouth dry. "But whatever made that sound, it's hurt, it's angry. And it knows we're here. We should go back," Geraldo said, but his voice lacked conviction. They all knew that whatever was out here in this forest they had hunted their entire lives. It was something they had never encountered before, and leaving it here, wounded and dangerous, could put the entire town at risk. "We keep going," Giuliano said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "But we stay together, and we stay alert. If anything moves, we shoot first and ask questions later." "Agreed?" "Agreed," Geraldo and Isabella said in unison. They pressed forward, following the blood trail deeper into the forest, into darkness that seemed to have weight and substance, into a night that had transformed the familiar into something alien and threatening. The dogs stayed close, their growls a constant backdrop to the sound of their footsteps and labored breathing. Giuliano's mind raced, trying to catalog what he knew, trying to find an explanation that made sense. A wounded jaguar? No, jaguars didn't make sounds like that. A person driven mad by pain and isolation? Possible, but the eyes they had seen were too low, too wide-set to be human. Some kind of exotic animal escaped from a private collection or zoo. Brazil had strict laws about such things, but he knew people broke them all the time. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, Giuliano felt something else, a primal recognition, an ancient fear that lived in the oldest parts of his brain, the part that remembered when humans were not the apex predators, when darkness held real dangers that no amount of firepower or courage could protect against, the part that whispered, "You're being hunted." The blood trail led them to a small clearing, maybe 30 meters across, where a massive fallen tree had created a natural opening in the canopy. Moonlight spilled through, turning everything silver and black. And there, in the center of the clearing, they found the source of the blood. It was a wild boar, or what was left of one. The animal had been torn apart with savage efficiency, its carcass spread across the clearing in a manner that suggested rage more than hunger. But what stopped Giuliano cold was the pattern of the destruction. The boar hadn't been killed by a jaguar or another predator. He had seen enough kills to know the difference. This was something else, something that had used tools or hands. "Mudeus," Geraldo whispered, crossing himself. Isabella stood frozen, her rifle trembling slightly. "Papa, what could do this?" Before Giuliano could answer, Rex's head snapped up, his ears pricked toward the far side of the clearing. All four dogs began barking again, backing away from something they could see or sense that the humans could not. And then it stepped into the moonlight. Giuliano's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It was human-shaped, roughly, standing on two legs, but taller than any man he had ever seen, easily over 2 meters tall. Its body was covered in matted hair or fur, dark and filthy with blood and mud. Its arms were too long, hanging past its knees, ending in hands that seemed to have too many fingers, and its face. The face was the worst part. Almost human, but stretched and distorted, with eyes that reflected the moonlight with an amber glow. It was breathing heavily, and Giuliano could see a massive wound in its side. Still seeping blood, the source of the trail they had followed. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they all stood frozen, humans and creature regarding each other across the moonlit clearing. Giuliano felt his finger tighten on the trigger of his rifle, felt every muscle in his body screaming at him to shoot, to defend, to destroy this impossible thing that violated every rule of nature he had ever learned. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the expression in those amber eyes, not the mindless hunger of a predator, but something else. Pain, yes, rage, certainly. But also fear. This creature, whatever it was as terrified as they were. Then Isabella's voice, barely a whisper, "Papa, it's hurt. It needs help." The moment shattered. The creature released that same terrible shriek they had heard earlier, a sound that seemed to pierce straight through Giuliano's chest. It took a lurching step toward them, arms outstretched, and the dogs went absolutely wild, straining against their handlers, barking themselves hoarse. Geraldo's rifle came up. "Get back," he shouted. "Get back or I'll shoot." But the creature didn't stop. It took another step, then another, moving with a strange, uneven gait that suggested every movement caused it agony. The wound in its side gaped open, and Giuliano could see deep into the torn flesh, could see things that no living creature should be able to survive showing. "Shoot it!" Geraldo yelled. "Giuliano, shoot it now!" Giuliano's finger was on the trigger. One shot, center mass. He had made this shot 1,000 times before. It would be easy, it would be over, but he didn't shoot. Because in that moment, with the creature closing the distance between them, with the dogs barking and Geraldo shouting and Isabella frozen beside him, Giuliano finally understood what his grandfather had tried to teach him all those years ago. The forest always calls back what belongs to it. This creature, this impossible thing, was part of the forest in a way that Giuliano had never fully grasped. It was the darkness under the trees, the silence between animal calls, the fear that made prey animals freeze and hunters hesitate. It was nature itself, wounded and angry, demanding their attention. The creature reached out one long arm toward Giuliano, its too many fingers spread wide, and he could see now that it wasn't trying to attack, it was reaching for help, the way a wounded animal might seek aid from the very predator that had injured it, driven by pain beyond the capacity for fear or caution. "Don't shoot," Giuliano said, surprising even himself. "Nobody shoot. Have you lost your mind?" Geraldo demanded, but he didn't pull his trigger either. The creature was less than 5 meters away now, close enough that Giuliano could smell it, a wild animal scent mixed with blood and something else, something that reminded him uncomfortably of the way humans smelled when they were dying. Its amber eyes locked onto his, and in their depths, he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Recognition, intelligence, a plea for mercy that transcended language or species. "It's okay," Giuliano heard himself saying, though every instinct screamed that this was madness. "We're not going to hurt you. We just want to." The creature's eyes suddenly widened, looking past Giuliano towards something behind them. A new sound filled the clearing, the roar of engines, the shouts of men, the crash of people moving through the undergrowth with no care for stealth. Lights blazed through the trees, powerful spotlights, not flashlights turning night into artificial day. "Target acquired," someone shouted in Portuguese. "Don't let it escape." The creature released another shriek, this one pure terror, and spun around, lurching toward the far side of the clearing. Giuliano grabbed Isabella and pulled her down just as gunfire erupted around them, not hunting rifles but military-grade automatic weapons, bullets tearing through the air where they had been standing seconds before. "Get down!" Geraldo screamed, throwing himself flat. The clearing exploded into chaos. The dogs scattered, still barking frantically. The creature tried to run, but its wounded leg gave out, sending it crashing to the ground. Men in tactical gear and masks swarmed into the clearing from every direction, their weapons trained on the fallen creature. "No!" Giuliano shouted, not even sure why he was trying to stop them. "Stop shooting! It's injured, it's not!" A heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder, spinning him around. A man in black tactical gear with no identifying insignia stood over him, his face hidden behind a balaclava. "You need to leave. Now. This is a restricted area. This is public forest land," Giuliano shot back. "We have every right to." "You have no rights here tonight," the man interrupted coldly. "Take your daughter and your friend and go home. Forget what you saw. If you speak about this to anyone, there will be consequences. Do you understand?" Behind them, more gunfire. The creature's shrieks cut off mid-sound. Giuliano felt something die inside him, not fear, not even anger, but a profound sense of loss for something he couldn't name. "I said, do you understand?" Giuliano looked into the man's eyes, cold, professional, utterly devoid of empathy, and slowly nodded. "Good. Now go." They gathered the dogs and fled, or rather they were herded out of the forest by armed men who appeared seemingly from nowhere, guiding them back to the trailhead with tactical efficiency. They didn't speak, didn't threaten, just maintained a presence that made it clear that resistance would be futile and dangerous. When they finally emerged onto the main road, Geraldo's truck exactly where they had left it, the armed men melted back into the forest, leaving them standing in the humid night air, trembling with adrenaline and shock. "What the hell just happened?" Geraldo finally asked, his voice shaking. Giuliano looked back at the dark tree line where lights still flickered between the trees and distant shouts echoed through the night. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But whatever that was, it wasn't random poachers or an escaped zoo animal. Those men, ... they were expecting it. They were hunting it." "Hunting it?" Isabella's voice was small, frightened in a way that broke Giuliano's heart. "But what was it, Papa? What did we see?" Giuliano put his arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "I don't know. Minha filha. I don't know." But as they drove back into Tres Rios, past the darkened houses and empty streets, Giuliano couldn't shake the image of those amber eyes, couldn't forget the desperate plea for help he had seen in them. Whatever that creature had been, it had been alive, intelligent, and terrified. And now it was probably dead, killed by men who operated in shadows and left no trace of their presence beyond bullet casings and blood. The forest had called them that night, just as the video title had promised. The dogs had sensed it first, and they had answered that call. But what they had found in those dark trees was not a simple mystery to be solved or a danger to be eliminated. It was something that challenged everything Giuliano thought he knew about the natural world, about what was possible and impossible, about what might exist in the wild places where humans rarely ventured. As they pulled up to his house, Giuliano noticed that the forest had come alive again. He could hear insects buzzing, night birds calling, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. Whatever had kept them silent was gone, finished, eliminated. The natural order had been restored, but at what cost? And what else might be out there hiding in the vast Atlantic forest, unknown and unprotected, waiting for the next hunter to stumble upon their existence? Giuliano helped Isabella inside, settled the exhausted dogs in their yard, and watched as Geraldo drove away without another word. They would talk tomorrow, when shock had faded into memory, when they had time to process what they had witnessed. But tonight Giuliano stood alone on his porch, staring at the tree line, and wondered if he would ever feel safe in the forest again. Wondered if he would ever be able to hunt without thinking about those amber eyes. Wondered what secrets the darkness still held, and whether some mysteries were better left unsolved. The forest had called them. And now, having answered that call, Giuliano understood that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The days following that night in the forest passed in a blur of forced normalcy and carefully maintained silence. Giuliano went through the motions of his daily life, maintaining his equipment, checking his hunting traps, helping Isabella with household chores, but his mind remained in that moonlit clearing, trapped in the moment between seeing the impossible and watching it die. 3 days after the incident, a man in an expensive suit appeared at Giuliano's door. He was tall, probably in his mid-50s, with silver hair precisely styled and eyes that reminded Giuliano of a jaguar assessing prey patient. Calculating, dangerous. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Ferreira, a consultant for the Brazilian Institute of Environment and Renewable Natural Resources, IBAMA. But something about him screamed military, not bureaucrat. "May I come in, Senor Costa?" he asked, his Portuguese formal and precise. "I believe we have matters to discuss." Giuliano had been expecting this, in a way. You couldn't witness something like that without there being consequences. He stepped aside, allowing the man entrance, and called for Isabella to make coffee, not because he wanted to be hospitable, but because he wanted her present for whatever was coming. They sat in Giuliano's modest living room, surrounded by hunting trophies and family photographs. Dr. Ferreira accepted the coffee Isabella offered, with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You were in the forest 3 nights ago," Dr. Ferreira said, not making it a question. "You, your daughter, and Geraldo Alves. You encountered something unusual." "I don't know what you're talking about," Giuliano said flatly. Dr. Ferreira smiled, pulling out a tablet from his leather briefcase. He swiped through several screens, then turned it toward Giuliano. "This was taken from a trail camera we had positioned along the path you took that night. The image showed the 3 of them, plus the dogs, frozen in the moment they had discovered the blood trail. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., exactly when Giuliano remembered being there. We have cameras throughout that section of forest," Dr. Ferreira continued, taking back the tablet. "We've been monitoring the area for several weeks, tracking something that had been causing problems." "You and your friends stumbled into an active operation to hunt down an animal?" Isabella asked, her voice sharp with anger. "Because that's what it looked like to us, men with military weapons gunning down something that was injured and scared." Dr. Ferreira turned his calculating gaze to her. "Senorita Costa, what you saw was not an animal, at least not in the conventional sense." "Then what was it?" Giuliano demanded. "That information is classified. What I can tell you is that you and your companions witnessed something that poses a significant threat to public safety. The creature you encountered had killed 6 people over the past 2 months. Farmers, a family camping too close to its territory. We had been tracking it for weeks, and your intervention, while well-meaning, nearly compromised our operation." Giuliano felt cold despite the humid heat. 6 people? But there were no reports. "Because we suppressed them," Dr. Ferreira interrupted calmly. "Mass hysteria serves no one, Senor Costa. Imagine the panic if people knew there was something in the forest capable of tearing apart full-grown men. The economic impact alone on regional tourism and agriculture would be devastating." "So you lied," Isabella said flatly. "You covered it up." "We managed the situation appropriately, Doctor," Ferreira corrected. "And now that the immediate threat has been neutralized, we can focus on ensuring it never happens again." "Neutralized?" Giuliano repeated the word, tasting its clinical coldness. "You mean you killed it?" "I mean we removed a dangerous predator from an environment where it posed a risk to human life. Surely, as a hunter, you can appreciate the necessity of that action." Giuliano wanted to argue, wanted to explain about the look in the creature's eyes, about the sense that they had killed something rare and irreplaceable. But he also remembered Dr. Ferreira's words, 6 people dead. If that was true, and he had no reason to doubt it, then maybe the kill had been necessary after all. "Why are you here?" he asked instead. "If it's dead, if the operation is over, why come to us now?" "2 reasons, Doctor," Ferreira said, finishing his coffee and setting the cup down with precise care. First, to ensure your continued silence. You will not speak about what you saw to anyone, not friends, not family, not media, not authorities. You were never in that forest 3 nights ago. The incident never happened. In exchange, we will ensure that no charges are filed against you for interfering with a federal operation. Charges? Isabella's voice rose. We didn't know it was an operation. Ignorance is not a legal defense, Senorita. You entered a restricted area. Yes, it was restricted. Though we couldn't post signs without drawing attention, and you interfered with federal agents in the performance of their duties. That alone could result in significant jail time. He let that sink in, then smiled again. But as I said, we're willing to overlook it in exchange for your cooperation. And the second reason? Giuliano asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Dr. Ferreira reached into his briefcase again, this time producing a thick manila folder. Your reputation as a hunter is well known in this region, Senor Costa. Your knowledge of the Atlantic forest is exceptional. We would like to offer you a position as a consultant to our ... research division. The pay is substantial, 3 times what you currently make. The work would be intermittent, a few days per month, and you would be helping to protect your community from threats they will never even know existed. Giuliano stared at the folder, not touching it. You want me to hunt more of these things. We want you to help us identify potential threats and track them when necessary. Not all cryptid fauna requires elimination. Some simply need to be monitored and managed to prevent human-wildlife conflict. Cryptid fauna, Isabella repeated. You're talking about it like it's science fiction. On the contrary, Senorita Costa, it's very real science. The world is far stranger than most people realize. The Atlantic forest alone contains an estimated 8,000 plant species, more than 600 bird species, and likely hundreds of animal species we have yet to properly catalog. Is it so difficult to believe that among all that biodiversity there might be creatures that have evolved to avoid human detection? Creatures that until recently lived their entire lives without ever encountering us? Until we encroached on their territory, Giuliano said quietly, understanding dawning. Until we pushed deeper into the forest, cutting down trees, building roads, forcing them into contact with us. Precisely. And when that contact occurs, when these reclusive species are confronted with human expansion, they sometimes react ... aggressively. That's where people like you come in, people who understand the forest, who can read signs others miss, who can help us maintain the delicate balance between human development and wildlife preservation. Giuliano opened the folder. Inside were photographs. The creature they had seen in the clearing, yes, but also others. Things that looked like monkeys but weren't quite right, their proportions slightly off. Large cat-like animals with features that didn't match any known species. Even what appeared to be a massive snake or serpent, photographed coiled around a tree. Its scales reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. How many? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. How many of these things are out there? We don't know, Dr. Ferreira admitted. Dozens, perhaps hundreds across Brazil alone. Most are harmless, content to avoid human contact. But some, like the creature you encountered, become problematic. They're the ones we focus on. Giuliano closed the folder, his mind reeling. Part of him wanted to refuse, to walk away from this madness and return to his simple life of hunting wild boar and deer. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to the forest mysteries, that had felt a strange connection to the dying creature in the clearing, was intrigued despite himself. I need time to think about it, he said finally, of course. You have 1 week. After that, the offer expires, and will require you to sign a more legally binding non-disclosure agreement regarding everything you've witnessed. Dr. Ferreira stood, smoothing his suit. I hope you'll make the right decision, Senor Costa. You have a rare gift, the ability to move between the world of men and the world of the wild. We need people like you. After Dr. Ferreira left, Giuliano and Isabella sat in silence for a long time, the folder of photographs lying on the table between them like an unexploded bomb. You're not actually considering this, are you? Isabella finally asked. I don't know, Giuliano admitted. 6 people, Isa. 6 people dead. If there are more of these things out there, if they're dangerous, ... Papa, you saw that creature. It was hurt, scared. It didn't attack us until those men started shooting. Maybe it killed those people in self-defense. Maybe it doesn't matter if more people die, Giuliano interrupted gently. I spent my whole life learning to read the forest, to understand its rhythms and its dangers. If that knowledge can prevent deaths, don't I have a responsibility to use it? And if they use you to hunt down creatures that are just trying to survive, creatures that might be the last of their kind? Isabella's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Mama used to say that every life has value, that we should never kill without understanding what we're taking from the world. What would she say about this? Giuliano had no answer. His wife had been a teacher, a woman who saw beauty and potential in everything, who had taught their daughter to question and to think critically. What would she say if she could see him now, contemplating becoming a hunter of the impossible, a tracker of nightmares? That night, Giuliano couldn't sleep. He stood on his porch, staring at the forest as he had done so many times before. But now the familiar trees seemed to hold different meanings. How many eyes were watching from those shadows? How many creatures had adapted to human presence by becoming invisible, by learning our patterns and avoiding our paths? And more troubling, if Dr. Ferreira's organization was tracking and, when necessary, eliminating these cryptid species, what happened to the evidence? Where did the bodies go? What research was being done, and who decided which creatures lived and which died? Around 2 a.m., Geraldo's truck pulled up quietly. His friend climbed out, looking as exhausted and haunted as Giuliano felt. Couldn't sleep either? Geraldo asked, joining him on the porch. They came to see you too, this morning? Same speech, same folder of nightmares, same job offer. Geraldo pulled out a cigarette, lit it, took a long drag. I told them I needed to think about it. Me too. They stood in companionable silence. Two hunters facing a choice neither had expected to make. My grandfather used to tell me stories, Geraldo said eventually, about things in the forest that weren't quite animals, weren't quite human. He called them the silent ones, creatures that had been here long before us, that would be here long after we're gone. He said the old hunters knew about them, that there was an understanding. We stayed in our world, they stayed in theirs, and everyone survived. But the worlds are overlapping now, Giuliano said. We've pushed too far into theirs and they have nowhere left to go, so what do? Become the enforcers who keep them in line? Or do we refuse and let someone else do the dirty work? Before Giuliano could answer, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Check your security camera footage from tonight. Look at the tree line. Then decide if you want our protection or not. With a growing sense of dread, Giuliano pulled up his home security system on his phone. He had installed cameras around his property 3 years ago after a spate of break-ins in the region. Now he watched the footage from the camera facing the forest. Fast-forwarding through the evening until Mudeus, Geraldo whispered, looking over his shoulder. There, clear as day in the infrared camera, were figures moving along the tree line. Not animals, not humans, but something in between. 3 of them, walking upright, pausing occasionally to look toward Giuliano's house. Watching, waiting. The timestamp showed they had been there for over an hour, from 1 a.m. until just minutes before Geraldo arrived. They're still out there, Giuliano breathed. More of them. They know where we live. Another text arrived. They came to investigate what happened to their pack member. Right now they're just watching, trying to understand. But if they decide you're a threat, we won't be able to get there in time to save you. Think about that before you decide. Giuliano looked at Geraldo, seeing his own fear reflected in his friend's eyes. They had thought the danger was over, that the death of the wounded creature had ended the threat. But now they understood. They had stumbled into a war they hadn't known existed, and there was no neutral ground. They had to choose a side or become casualties. I'll do it, Giuliano said quietly. I'll take the job. You sure? No. But I'm more sure of this than I am of facing whatever's out there without help. He looked back at the tree line, where the infrared footage showed the figures had vanished as silently as they had appeared. What about you? Geraldo took another long drag on his cigarette, then stubbed it out. I've been hunting these forests for 40 years. Never knew they were hunting back. Yeah, I'm in. But we do this our way. We verify the threats are real before we act. We make sure we're not just eliminating creatures for the crime of existing. Deal, deal. They shook hands, 2 hunters bound by a choice neither wanted to make but both knew was necessary. Tomorrow, Giuliano would call Dr. Ferreira and accept the position. Tomorrow he would begin his training as a hunter of the impossible, a tracker of cryptid species, a guardian of the boundary between human civilization and the wild unknown. But tonight he would stand watch on his porch, rifle close at hand, protecting his daughter and his home from threats that had always been there, hidden in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The forest had called them, and they had answered. Now they were bound to it in ways they were only beginning to understand, not as casual visitors or traditional hunters, but as something new, something that existed between worlds, neither fully human nor fully wild, but a bridge between the two. And as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, Giuliano wondered if he had made the right choice, or if he had simply traded one form of blindness for another. Only time would tell. Only the forest would judge. 6 weeks into his new role as a consultant for Dr. Ferreira's organization, which he learned was officially called the Special Division for Cryptozoological Assessment and Response, or SDCAR, Giuliano found himself deeper in the Atlantic forest than he had ever ventured before, tracking something that had killed 3 cattle and terrorized a small farming community near the border of Snow Hollow State. The training had been intense and disturbing in equal measure. He had spent hours in sterile white rooms studying photographs and video footage of creatures that shouldn't exist. He had learned about their territorial behaviors, their dietary preferences, their mating cycle, all gleaned from years of covert observation and field research that the public would never know about. Most unsettling was the classification system SDCAR used. Class A cryptids were considered harmless, shy creatures that avoided human contact and posed no threat. Class B were potentially dangerous if provoked, but generally non-aggressive. Class C were active threats that had demonstrated the ability and willingness to harm humans. The creature they had encountered that first night had been Class C. Priority Red, the highest threat level, requiring immediate neutralization. What Giuliano was tracking now was classified as Class B, pending verification, a large predator, possibly canid in origin, that had been observed only in glimpses and shadows. Local farmers called it sombra dentata, the toothed shadow, and claimed it could move through the forest without making a sound, appearing and disappearing like smoke. Giraldo was with him, along with 2 SD-car field agents, Santos, a taciturn man in his 30s who moved with military precision, and Carla, a biologist in her late 20s who approached the creatures they tracked with more scientific curiosity than fear. They'd been searching for 3 days, following a trail of disrupted undergrowth, unusual scat samples, and the occasional tuft of dark fur caught on low branches. How much further? Santos asked, checking his GPS unit. They were operating in an area with minimal cell coverage, relying on satellite communication devices that SDCAR provided. 2, maybe 3 kilometers, Giuliano estimated, reading the signs that others would miss, the way certain plants were crushed in a directional pattern, the claw marks on tree bark indicating a creature marking territory, the faint but distinctive scent that his trained nose could now identify as belonging to something not quite wolf, not quite dog, but somewhere in that evolutionary spectrum. We should make camp before dark, Carla suggested. I'd rather not track this thing at night, agreed, Giraldo said. Giuliano, what do you think? Giuliano was about to respond when all 3 of his dogs he had brought, Rex, Lua, and Travao, on this expedition suddenly froze, their attention fixed on something ahead. Not the aggressive posture they had shown that first night, but alert and interested. Contact, Santos said quietly, raising his tranquilizer rifle. SDCAR policy for Class B cryptids was capture and relocation when possible, lethal force only if necessary. Everyone spread out, establish a perimeter. They moved into position with practiced efficiency, forming a loose circle around the area where the dogs were focused. Giuliano crouched low, scanning the dense undergrowth for any sign of movement. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in shafts of golden light, creating a chiaroscuro effect that made it difficult to distinguish between shadow and substance. Then he saw it. The sombra dentata emerged from behind a massive fig tree with a grace that seemed impossible for something of its size. It was a Sealy the bulk of a jaguar, but built more like a wolf, with long legs designed for pursuit rather than ambush. Its fur was a deep charcoal gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and its eyes, intelligent, cautious eyes, swept across the humans with clear assessment. Don't shoot, Giuliano whispered urgently. Look at its behavior. It's not aggressive. Indeed, the creature had not adopted any threatening posture. It stood at the edge of the clearing, watching them with what appeared to be curiosity more than hostility. Giuliano could see old scars across its flank, marks that suggested it had survived encounters with jaguars or other large predators. This was an animal that had learned caution through experience. Carla, do you have the portable camera ready? Santos asked, keeping his rifle trained on the cryptid. Recording, she confirmed, her voice tight with excitement. This is incredible. We're getting clean footage at less than 20 meters. The sombra dentata's head swiveled toward Carla's voice, its ears larger and more mobile than a wolf's, rotating to pinpoint the sound. Then it did something that made Giuliano's breath catch. It sat down, much like a domestic dog would, and tilted its head in an unmistakably inquisitive gesture. It's not afraid of us, Giraldo observed. Or if it is, curiosity's winning out. Possible prior exposure to humans, Carla theorized, still filming. These cryptids aren't supernatural, they're biological entities that have adapted to avoid human detection. But adaptation doesn't mean zero contact. It's possible this individual has observed humans from a distance, learned we're not an immediate threat. Then why kill the cattle? Santos challenged. 3 cows in 2 weeks. That's aggressive predation. It's opportunistic feeding, Giuliano said, understanding, clicking into place. Look at how thin it is. You can see its ribs. It's malnourished. The cattle were easy prey compared to wild game. It wasn't attacking out of aggression. It was starving. As if to confirm his assessment, the sombra dentata stood and began moving around the perimeter of their circle. Not approaching, but not fleeing either. Giuliano could see the pronounced hip bones, the way its movements were slightly stiff, signs of hunger-induced weakness. This was a predator pushed to desperation by lack of prey. Why would there be no prey? Carla wondered aloud. This forest should be teeming with wildlife. Not anymore, a new voice said, and they all spun to find Dr. Ferreira stepping out of the undergrowth, accompanied by 4 more SDCAR agents. That's what we're really here to investigate, Doctor. Ferreira? Giuliano was stunned. How did you satellite tracking on your communication devices, combined with drone surveillance? I've been monitoring your progress for the past hour. He gestured to the sombra dentata, which had retreated to a safe distance but was still watching them. That creature is not the problem. It's a symptom. Something has disrupted the ecosystem in this region, driving out or killing the natural prey species. The sombra dentata turned to cattle because it has no other choice. What kind of disruption? Santos asked, his military training showing in the crisp efficiency of his question. That's what I need your team to determine. We've received reports of similar ecological dead zones appearing throughout the Atlantic, forest areas where the normal wildlife patterns have broken down, where even insects become scarce. At first we thought it might be habitat destruction, illegal logging, or pollution. But the patterns are wrong for that. These zones appear suddenly, expand rapidly, and seem to be moving. Moving? Geraldo's skepticism was evident. An ecological dead zone that moves. That doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't. Which is why we need people with your expertise to investigate. Dr. Ferreira pulled out a tablet showing them a map of the Atlantic forest with several red zones marked. 7 confirmed locations so far, each appearing within the last 3 months. And in each location, we've seen increased cryptid activity, creatures being pushed out of their normal territories, forced into contact with human populations. Some adapt, like our friend here. Others, double quotes, he didn't need to finish. They all knew what happened to the others. Class C designations. Priority red eliminations. You want us to find the source, Giuliano said. I want you to find the source and determine if it's natural or ... Dr. Ferreira paused, choosing his words carefully. Something else. Something potentially Class C itself. You think there's a cryptid species causing this? Carla's eyes widened. What kind of creature could disrupt an entire ecosystem? That's what we need to find out. And Senor Costa, this is why we recruited you. You understand the forest in ways that books and training cannot teach. If there's something out there changing the rules, you'll be able to recognize it. Giuliano looked at the sombra dentata, still watching them with those intelligent eyes. A creature pushed to the edge by forces beyond its control, doing what it needed to survive. He felt a kinship with it. They were both caught up in something larger than themselves, both trying to navigate a world that made less sense with each passing day. What happens to it? He asked, gesturing to the cryptid. If the ecosystem's collapsing, where can we relocate it? We've identified a preserve in Piranha where the ecological balance is still intact. It will be tranquilized, transported, and released far from human populations. With adequate prey available, it should revert to natural hunting behaviors. And if the dead zone spreads to Piranha, Dr. Ferreira met his gaze steadily. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. For now, our priority is understanding and stopping the spread. Santos moved forward with his tranquilizer rifle, but Giuliano held up a hand. Let me try something first. He reached into his pack and pulled out a packet of dried meat provisions for their expedition. Slowly, making no sudden movements, he approached the sombra dentata, holding out the offering. The creature tensed, ready to flee, but hunger kept it in place. It's okay, Giuliano said softly in Portuguese, knowing the words mattered less than the tone. We're not here to hurt you. We're trying to help. He tossed the meat halfway between himself and the cryptid, then backed away. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sombra dentata crept forward, snatched the meat, and retreated to a safe distance to eat. Giuliano could see the desperate hunger in the way it devoured the food, barely chewing. Again, Dr. Ferreira said quietly, and Giuliano repeated the process, this time tossing several more pieces of meat. Each time the sombra dentata came a little closer, its fear gradually diminishing. By the 5th offering, it was eating from less than 3 meters away, close enough that Giuliano could see the individual hairs of its unusual fur, could smell the wild musk of its scent. Now, Dr. Ferreira said, and Santos raised his tranquilizer rifle. No, wait, Giuliano started, but the soft thud of the compressed air weapon cut him off. The dart caught the sombra dentata in the shoulder. The creature yelped, a sound more pitiful than frightening, and tried to run, but the sedative worked quickly. Within seconds it collapsed, its breathing slowing to a steady rhythm. Why did you use me like that? Giuliano demanded, anger rising hot in his chest. You made me gain its trust just to betray it. I made success more likely and reduced trauma for the creature, Dr. Ferreira corrected calmly. A sedated animal that isn't fleeing in terror is safer to transport and more likely to survive the relocation process. You did the right thing, even if it doesn't feel like it. Carla and the other agents moved forward to begin the process of preparing the sombra dentata for transport, working with practiced efficiency. Giuliano stood back, watching them inject antibiotics, perform a quick physical examination, and load the unconscious cryptid into a specialized transport container. I understand your anger, Dr. Ferreira said, coming to stand beside him. You form connections quickly with animals, with places, even with creatures that most people would shoot on sight. It's part of what makes you valuable to us. But you need to learn to separate personal feelings from operational necessity. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, Giuliano said quietly. Becoming someone who can watch an intelligent creature be manipulated and sedated and feel nothing. Becoming someone who sees these cryptids as problems to be managed rather than lives to be respected. The two aren't mutually exclusive. We respect the sombra dentata enough to relocate it rather than eliminate it. We respect it enough to try to solve the ecological problem that's starving it. But we also recognize that human lives take priority, that a hungry predator near farming communities represents an unacceptable risk. And who decides which creatures get relocated and which get eliminated? Who decides which lives have value? Dr. Ferreira was quiet for a moment, expression thoughtful. I do. And now increasingly so do you. That's the burden of knowledge, Senor Costa. Ignorance allows for absolute moral position. Once you understand the complexity, once you see all the factors involved, you're forced to make difficult choices that have no perfect answer. He turned to face Giuliano fully. But you can walk away, go back to hunting wild boar and living a simple life, but you'll never be able to unknow what you've learned. You'll always wonder what's happening in these forests, what creatures are suffering or dying because the people making decisions don't have your insight. Or you can stay, accept the burden, and try to make the best choices possible with imperfect information. Giuliano wanted to argue, wanted to find a flaw in Dr. Ferrera's logic, but he couldn't. Because the man was right, the knowledge couldn't be unlearned, the responsibility couldn't be avoided. He had crossed a threshold that night in the clearing, and there was no going back. "Tell me about the dead zones," he said instead. "Show me everything you know." Dr. Ferrera smiled, not with triumph, but with something that might have been respect. "Come with me. There's more to show you back at base camp." They hiked back through the forest as evening fell, the sombra dentata safely contained and on its way to relocation. But Giuliano couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes followed their progress through the trees. When they reached the base camp, a sophisticated mobile operations center hidden under camouflage netting, Dr. Ferrera led them into a climate-controlled trailer filled with computer equipment and research materials. "These are the dead zones," he said, pulling up satellite imagery on a large monitor. The maps showed the 7 red zones he had mentioned earlier, each one a roughly circular area of forest between 5 and 10 square kilometers. They appeared between October and December of last year in no obvious pattern. Different elevations, different proximity to human populations, different types of forest composition. "What do they have in common?" Carla asked, leaning in to study the images. "That's just it, we can't find any common factors. The soil composition varies, the water sources are different, even the climate microzones don't match. It's as if something chose these locations randomly and began draining them. Draining them of what?" Geraldo asked. Dr. Ferrera brought up a new image microscopic footage of soil samples. "Everything. Nutrients, microorganisms, even organic matter. The soil in these zones is becoming sterile at an accelerated rate. And it's not just the soil water samples show dramatic decreases in dissolved oxygen and organic compounds. The ecosystem isn't dying, it's being consumed." Giuliano felt a chill run down his spine. Consumed by what? We don't know. We've found no evidence of chemical contamination, no radioactive signatures, no known biological agents. Whatever is doing this, it's something we've never encountered before. And you think it's a cryptid? Santos sounded skeptical. What kind of creature could do this on such a scale? Perhaps one we've never categorized because it operates on a level we haven't been monitoring. Most of our cryptid research focuses on megafauna, large animals that interact with the environment in visible ways. But what if there's something smaller? Something that operates at a microbiologic or fungal level? Something that can spread through soil and water, consuming organic matter and expanding its territory? Like a disease? Carla suggested. Or like a superorganism, Dr. Ferrera said. A colony intelligence that operates through countless individual components, coordinating to achieve a common goal. That's science fiction, Geraldo protested. So was everything else you've seen since joining SDCRR, Dr. Ferrera countered. Slime molds display rudimentary intelligence. Fungal networks can communicate across kilometers. Ant colonies operate as single superorganisms. Is it so impossible that something in the Atlantic forest could have evolved similar capabilities on a larger, more sophisticated scale? Giuliano studied the maps, his hunter's intuition picking up on something the others seemed to have missed. The zones are expanding toward each other. What? Dr. Ferrera looked more closely at the imagery. Look at the expansion patterns. They're not growing uniformly in all directions. Each zone is extending tendrils toward the others, like they're reaching out to connect. If that continues, if they merge, then we'd have a single dead zone spanning hundreds of square kilometers, Dr. Ferrera finished grimly. An ecological disaster that would devastate the Atlantic forest and potentially spread beyond it. The room fell silent as they contemplated the implications. Giuliano thought about all the creatures he had seen in his training, the diversity of cryptid species that called the forest home, most of them harmless and valuable parts of the ecosystem. If their habitats were consumed by these spreading dead zones, they would be pushed into human territory, forced to become Class C threats through no fault of their own. And then there were the millions of people who lived in and around the Atlantic forest, who depended on it for water, food, and economic sustenance. An ecological collapse on the scale Dr. Ferrera was describing would be catastrophic. "What do you need us to do?" Giuliano asked. "Tomorrow we insert you into the nearest dead zone, the one approximately 15 kilometers northwest of here. Your mission is to identify the source of the ecological degradation, collect samples, and report back. If you encounter anything unusual, and I mean anything, you document it and retreat immediately. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. Information is our priority, and if we find what's causing it," Santos asked. "What if it's hostile? Then you fall back and we'll send in a tactical response team. Your job is reconnaissance, not confrontation." They spent the rest of the evening preparing equipment and reviewing protocols. Giuliano found himself unable to eat, his stomach tight with apprehension. They were about to walk into an area where the normal rules of nature no longer applied, looking for something that might not want to be found. That night, lying in his tent with Rex curled up beside him, Giuliano thought about Isabella back home. He had called her before entering the deep forest zone, had told her he would be out of contact for a few days. She had been understanding, supportive even, but he had heard the worry in her voice. What would she think if she could see him now, preparing to venture into an ecological dead zone to hunt something that could consume entire forests? Would she be proud of his courage or appalled by his recklessness? His phone buzzed with a final message before satellite communication became necessary. "Be careful, Papa. The forest needs you to come home. I need you to come home." Giuliano typed a response. "I will. I promise. Te amo minha filha." But as he sent the message and watched the signal bars disappear, he wondered if that was a promise he could keep. Because tomorrow, they would enter the dead zone. And whatever was waiting there, whatever had consumed the life from the forest, he had a feeling it had been waiting for someone like him, someone curious enough, brave enough, or foolish enough to step into its territory. The forest had called him again, and this time he wasn't sure he would make it back to answer his daughter's call home. The dead zone was worse than anything Giuliano had imagined. They crossed the boundary at dawn. There was no gradual transition, no slow diminishment of life. One moment they were walking through normal Atlantic forest, dense and vibrant with the sounds of birds and insects. The next, they stepped across an invisible line and into silence. Complete, absolute silence. The trees on this side of the boundary still stood, but they were wrong. Their bark was gray and brittle, flaking off in sheets that crumbled to powder at the slightest touch. The leaves had turned a uniform pale yellow, hanging limp from branches that seemed too fragile to support even their minimal weight. The ground was covered in a layer of fine ash-like substance that rose in small clouds with each footstep, settling on their boots and equipment like toxic snow. "Oxygen levels are normal," Carla reported, checking her portable environmental monitor. "Temperature, humidity, all standard parameters within acceptable ranges." But the biological readings ... She looked up, her face pale. "There's nothing. No bacteria, no fungi, no microscopic life of any kind. It's like the soil has been sterilized." Santos swept the area with a Geiger counter. "No radiation. Whatever did this, it's not nuclear or chemical in any conventional sense." Geraldo crouched down, examining the gray powder that covered everything. He rubbed some between his fingers, then jerked his hand back. "It's warm. Not hot, but warmer than it should be, like it's generating heat." Giuliano released his dogs from their leads, watching as they explored the area with obvious reluctance. Rex kept his nose close to the ground, trying to find scent trails, but his behavior suggested he was finding nothing. Lua whimpered softly, pressing against Giuliano's leg for comfort. Only Trovao, the oldest and most experienced, seemed to be picking up on something. He moved slowly toward the center of the dead zone, his head raised, scenting the air. "Trovao senses something," Giuliano said quietly. "He's got a trail." They followed the dog deeper into the dead zone, their boots crunching on the brittle ground cover. The trees became increasingly skeletal, some having collapsed entirely, reduced to hollow husks that barely maintained their shape. The air developed a strange quality, not quite a smell, but a sensation, like static electricity building before a storm. "Electromagnetic readings are spiking," Carla announced, checking her equipment. "Nothing dangerous yet, but definitely anomalous. There's some kind of field being generated in this area." "Natural or artificial?" Santos asked, his hand moving to the tactical shotgun slung across his chest. SDCAR had loaded him with specialized ammunition, solid slugs, incendiary rounds, and something Giuliano had been told were containment rounds filled with a fast-hardening foam designed to immobilize large targets. Unknown. The pattern is too regular to be random geological activity, but too organic to be technological. It's like ... double quotes. Carla struggled for words. "It's like a heartbeat. Rising and falling in cycles, but not quite rhythmic." Giuliano felt it too, though he couldn't have explained how. A pulsing in the air, in the ground beneath his feet, almost below the threshold of conscious perception. It reminded him of standing near a massive generator, feeling the vibration more than hearing it. Trovao stopped abruptly, about 200 meters into the dead zone. He was staring at a particular tree larger than the others, easily 40 meters tall even in its current skeletal state. The base of the trunk was wrapped in something that at first glance looked like pale vines or roots. But as they approached, Giuliano realized it was something else entirely. "Is that ... webbing?" Geraldo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It did look like webbing, but far more substantial than anything a spider could produce. The strands were as thick as Giuliano's thumb, pale gray in color with an almost opalescent sheen where light hit them at certain angles. They wrapped around the base of the tree in complex patterns, disappearing into the ground and extending up the trunk as far as they could see. Carla approached cautiously, pulling out a sample collection kit. "I need to get a specimen. This could be our smoking gun." "Wait," Santos said sharply. "We don't know if it's safe to touch." "That's why we're here, to collect samples and information, Carla." pulled on heavy-duty gloves, and carefully approached the nearest strand. She extended a scalpel, preparing to cut a small sample, when Trovau began barking urgently, his voice echoing in the dead silence. The webbing moved. Not the slight movement of wind or settling. It writhed, contracting and expanding like muscle tissue. The strands around the tree base pulled tighter, and Giuliano heard something crack deep within the trunk. More webbing emerged from the ground, spreading outward in a radial pattern, covering more of the gray, ash-like soil. "Back away," Giuliano commanded, slowly. "Don't make any sudden movements." They retreated in a tight group, but the webbing continued to spread, moving with unsettling speed. Within seconds, it had covered an area 10 meters in diameter around the tree. Then it stopped, becoming still again, as if it had been testing their reaction. "What the hell is that thing?" Santos breathed. "I think ... double quotes." Carla's voice trembled slightly. "I think we just found Dr. Ferreira's superorganism, and I don't think it's small." She was right. As Giuliano's eyes adjusted to what he was seeing, he realized the webbing wasn't just around this one tree. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see it everywhere. Barely visible strands connecting tree to tree, running along the ground beneath the gray powder, even extending up into the canopy. It was a vast network, spanning the entire dead zone they could see and probably far beyond. "It's one organism," Geraldo said in horrified awe. "This whole dead zone, it's all connected. It's all one thing. And it's consuming the forest," Giuliano added, understanding clicking into place. "Breaking down organic matter, extracting nutrients, using the energy to grow and expand. That's why everything looks desiccated. It's being drained, digested from the inside out." "We need to call this in," Santos said, reaching for his satellite communication device. "This is way beyond our operational parameters." But before he could activate the device, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. The electromagnetic readings on Carla's monitors spiked dramatically, and the air itself seemed to shimmer. The webbing around the tree began to glow with a faint bioluminescence, pulsing in that same irregular rhythm they had felt earlier. "It knows we're here," Carla whispered. "It's responding to our presence." From deeper in the dead zone, they heard a sound, a deep, resonant thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't quite a voice, wasn't quite animal, but it conveyed meaning nonetheless. Curiosity, perhaps, or warning, or hunger. "Run," Giuliano said. "Everyone, back to the boundary. Now." They ran, but the ground fought them. The gray powder became sticky, clinging to their boots like mud. Webbing erupted from the soil, trying to snag their ankles. The trees around them began to collapse, weakened structures finally giving way, creating obstacles that forced them to weave and dodge. Rex, Lua, and Treveo sprinted ahead, their animal instincts screaming at them to flee. Santos fired a burst from his shotgun at a particularly large strand of webbing that blocked their path, the rounds tearing through it but seemingly doing no real damage. The severed end simply pulled back and regrew. "It's too fast!" Geraldo shouted. "It's cutting us off." He was right. The organism Giuliano could no longer think of it as simple webbing was spreading with alarming speed, creating a living barrier between them and the boundary. They were being herded, pushed away from escape and deeper into its territory. "This way?" Giuliano yelled, spotting a gap in the spreading network. They veered left, scrambling over a fallen tree, sliding down a small embankment. The dogs stayed close, barking frantically. Then Carla screamed. Giuliano spun to see her foot caught in a loop of webbing that had risen from the ground like a snare. She fell hard, and immediately more strands began wrapping around her legs, pulling her toward the base of a tree that was completely covered in the bioluminescent material. Santos reached her first, trying to cut the webbing with his combat knife, but the blade barely made a dent. "It's too strong. I can't use the containment rounds," Giuliano commanded, dropping to his knees beside Carla. He grabbed her under the arms, trying to pull her free, but the webbing had incredible tensile strength. It was like fighting steel cables. Santos loaded a specialized round and fired at point-blank range at the webbing holding Carla. The round exploded into fast-hardening foam, covering both Carla's legs and the attached webbing. The chemical reaction caused the strands to contract violently, and for a moment Giuliano thought they had made things worse. But then the webbing began to crack, brittle now from the foam's chemical composition. "Pull!" Santos yelled, and together they yanked Carla free, leaving chunks of the foam-encased webbing behind. So they ran again, Carla limping but mobile, Santos supporting her weight. The organism seemed to recoil from the area where they had used the containment foam, as if the chemical mixture was painful or harmful to it. That gave them the opening they needed. They burst through the boundary of the dead zone and into normal forest, the transition as abrupt as it had been on the way in. Birdsong and insect noise surrounded them, life in all its chaotic abundance. Behind them, the webbing stopped at the boundary line, pulsing with that eerie bioluminescence but not crossing over. "Keep moving," Giuliano ordered. "At least 100 meters. Then we stop and assess." They ran until their lungs burned, until the dogs began to lag from exhaustion. Finally, when they could no longer see the boundary of the dead zone, they collapsed against the base of a massive kapok tree, gasping for breath. Santos immediately got on the satellite communicator. SDCAR command. This is Field Team 7, priority emergency. We have encountered a Class C cryptid at Dead Zone Site 3. Multiple team members at risk. Immediate extraction and tactical response required. Repeat. Immediate extraction and tactical response required. While Santos is coordinated with command, Carla examined her legs where the webbing had grabbed her. The skin was red and irritated, already beginning to blister. "It's acidic," she said clinically, though Giuliano could hear the fear beneath her professional tone, or enzymatic. "It was starting to break down my skin tissue. For digestion," Geraldo said quietly. "If we hadn't gotten you out," double quotes, he didn't finish, but they all understood. They had just witnessed how the organism consumed organic matter, slowly, methodically, breaking it down at the molecular level. Carla would have been dissolved alive, her nutrients absorbed into the vast network that was consuming the forest. "Extraction team is en route," Santos reported. "ETA 30 minutes. Dr. Ferreira is mobilizing tactical response. He's bringing in everything we've got." "It won't be enough," Giuliano said, surprising himself with his certainty. "You didn't see how fast it moved, how coordinated it was? That organism isn't just one dead zone. All 7 zones are probably connected underground, forming one massive superorganism spanning hundreds of square kilometers. How do you fight something that size? Fire?" Geraldo suggested. "Burn it out?" "It's wet season in the Atlantic forest. Forest fires are nearly impossible to sustain, and even if you could burn one section, the organism would just regrow from undamaged areas. It's like trying to kill a tree by burning one branch." "And then what do we do?" Carla asked. "We can't just let it keep spreading. In 6 months, it could consume the entire Atlantic forest. In a year, it might spread beyond Brazil." Giuliano had no answer. This was beyond anything SDCAR had prepared them for, beyond anything he had ever encountered in his decades of hunting. They weren't dealing with an animal or even a colony. They were dealing with something that operated on a scale that made human efforts seem insignificant. The extraction helicopter arrived exactly on schedule, descending into a clearing a kilometer from their position. They were loaded aboard with military efficiency, the pilot keeping the rotors running even as they climbed in. Within minutes, they were airborne, watching the Atlantic forest spread below them like a green ocean, except for the patches of gray. 7 dead zones, visible even from altitude like wounds in the living landscape. And as Giuliano watched, he could swear they were larger than they had been in Dr. Ferreira's satellite imagery. Growing, spreading, reaching toward each other with inexorable patience. "Look," Carla said, pointing to her portable monitor. She had been tracking electromagnetic readings, and now she brought up a map overlay showing the signal strength across the forest. The dead zones are all emitting the same electromagnetic signature, and there are faint connecting lines between them. Underground networks, probably. They're not separate organisms. They never were. It's one entity with 7 visible manifestations on the surface. And if they connect ... double quotes, Santos trailed off. "Game over," Geraldo finished bluntly. "The Atlantic forest dies, every cryptid in it gets pushed into human territory, and we have an ecological disaster that makes the Amazon deforestation look minor by comparison." The helicopter banked, heading toward SDCR headquarters, a facility disguised as an environmental research station deep in a protected reserve. Giuliano looked back one more time at the forest that had been his life's work, his passion, his home, and he felt something he had never experienced before: fear for the future. Not just his future or even humanity's, but for the countless species that depended on the Atlantic forest for survival. They landed on a helipad surrounded by concrete bunkers and satellite dishes. Dr. Ferreira was waiting for them, surrounded by a dozen personnel in tactical gear and hazmat suits. He helped Carla down, immediately directing a medic to treat her burns. "Debrief room now," he ordered, his usual calm replaced by urgent intensity. "We have a situation developing, and your field intelligence is critical." The debrief room was packed with scientists, military consultants, and SDCAR administrators from across Brazil. Giuliano, Geraldo, Santos, and Carla sat at the head of a long table, recounting everything they had witnessed. The room grew progressively more silent as they described the organism's size, its ability to coordinate across vast areas, its apparent intelligence. When they finished, Dr. Ferreira brought up new satellite imagery on the main screen. "While you were in the field, we detected significant activity at all 7 dead zones. The electromagnetic readings spiked simultaneously across all sites. They're communicating, or more accurately, coordinating. And this morning we observed something that changes everything." He clicked to a new image, this one showing 2 of the dead zones that had been separate the day before. Now, a thin line of gray connected them, visible even from satellite altitude. "They've merged," Dr. Ferreira said flatly. 2 of the zones connected overnight. If this pattern continues, within 72 hours we'll have a single contiguous dead zone covering over 150 square kilometers, and it will continue growing exponentially from there. "How do we stop it?" someone asked from the back of the room. "We don't know if we can," Dr. Ferreira admitted. "Every protocol we have is designed for individual cryptids or small populations. We've never encountered anything that operates on this scale. Conventional weapons are useless. You can't shoot a fungal network. Fire won't work in wet season conditions. Chemical agents risk contaminating the entire watershed. And nuclear options ... double quotes, he paused. That's being discussed at levels above my clearance. Giuliano stood up, drawing all eyes to him. There might be another way. You said it's communicating, coordinating. That means it has some kind of central nervous system or command structure. If we can find that, the heart or brain or whatever it uses for coordination, we might be able to disrupt it. You're suggesting we go back in there? Santos looked at him like he was insane. After what we just survived, I'm suggesting we don't have a choice. If this organism is intelligent enough to coordinate across hundreds of kilometers, it might be intelligent enough to negotiate with, or vulnerable enough to target directly. Negotiate? Dr. Ferreira raised an eyebrow. You think we can talk to it? I think we have to try everything before we start dropping bombs on one of the most biodiverse regions on Earth. This organism, it's part of the ecosystem, even if it's an invasive part. It evolved here, or it adapted here. It's not evil or malicious. It's just trying to survive and reproduce like every other living thing. Maybe there's a way to contain it, to limit its expansion, to coexist. The room erupted in arguments. Some agreed with Giuliano's assessment. Others called it naive or dangerous. But Dr. Ferreira held up a hand for silence. Senor Costa makes a valid point. We have 72 hours before the political and economic pressure to use extreme measures becomes overwhelming. In that time, I'm authorizing a deep penetration mission into the largest dead zone. Your objective is to locate the central command structure if it exists, and determine if communication or targeted disruption is possible. Who's going on this suicide mission? Geraldo asked dryly. Volunteers only, Dr. Ferreira said. I won't order anyone into that death trap. Giuliano raised his hand immediately. Santos and Carla exchanged glances, then both raised theirs. After a moment's hesitation, Geraldo did the same. You're all insane, someone muttered. Probably, Giuliano agreed. But what choice do we have? They spent the next 24 hours preparing. Carla worked with the biology team to analyze samples of the webbing and gray powder, trying to identify chemical vulnerabilities. Santos coordinated with tactical specialists to design weaponry that might be effective against a distributed organism. Geraldo and Giuliano studied satellite imagery and electromagnetic readings, trying to map the internal structure of the dead zone and identify potential locations for a central command center. And Giuliano called Isabella. Papa? Her voice was thick with sleep. It was 2 a.m. Is everything okay? I need you to know something, he said, sitting alone in a borrowed office. In case things don't go well tomorrow. You're scaring me. What's happening? He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to explain about the organism and the dead zones and the mission he was about to undertake. But SDCR protocols forbade it. And more than that, he didn't want to burden her with fear. I'm doing important work, he said instead. Protecting the forest, protecting the creatures that live in it, and protecting you. But there's risk involved, and I need you to know. His voice caught. I need you to know that everything I've done, everything I'm about to do is because I love you more than anything in this world. You and your mother. You're the best things that ever happened to me, Papa. You're talking like you're not coming back. I am coming back, he said firmly. I promise. But if something does happen, you need to know that you're strong enough to survive it. You're your mother's daughter. You have her courage, her intelligence, her compassion. You'll be okay. They talked for another hour about nothing important, local gossip, her plans for university, the dogs, and how Rex had stolen food from the neighbor's yard. Normal things, ordinary things, the kinds of conversations that made life worth living. When they finally said goodbye, Giuliano felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. He would go into the dead zone tomorrow. He would face the organism at its heart. And whatever happened, he would do it knowing he had lived a life that mattered, that he had loved and been loved, that he had stood between his daughter and the darkness. That would have to be enough. Dawn came too quickly. The insertion team assembled on the helipad. Giuliano, Geraldo, Santos, Carla, and 2 additional SDCAR specialists, Miguel, an expert in mycology and fungal networks, and Adriana, a survival specialist who had spent years studying extremophile organisms in hostile environments. They were equipped with enough supplies for 48 hours, though everyone knew they would either succeed or fail long before that. Rex, Lua, and Travao were staying behind. Giuliano had argued for bringing them, but Dr. Ferreira had been adamant they were going into an environment where anything organic might be targeted by the organism. The dogs would be a liability and, more importantly, would likely be killed. Remember, Dr. Ferreira said as they prepared to board the helicopter, your mission is reconnaissance and possible negotiation. If you find the central structure, you attempt communication. If communication fails, you use the tactical options we've prepared. And if those fail, you get out and we'll implement the nuclear protocol. Wait, what nuclear protocol? Geraldo demanded. The one I'm hoping we don't have to use, Dr. Ferreira said grimly. Now go, and good luck. The helicopter lifted off, flying low over the forest. They passed over the boundary of the dead zone, and Giuliano saw with a sinking heart that it had grown significantly overnight. What had been separate gray patches were now connected by thick bands of lifeless forest, like veins spreading across diseased tissue. They landed at the coordinates Miguel had identified as the most likely location for a central structure, the mathematical center of the electromagnetic field readings, a point deep within the original dead zone where the organism had first appeared. The moment they touched ground, Giuliano felt it, the pulsing, that rhythmic beat that was almost but not quite regular. It was stronger here, so powerful it made his teeth ache and his vision blur slightly at the edges. Electromagnetic readings are off the charts, Carla reported. Whatever's here, it's generating massive amounts of energy. They moved in formation, with Adriana and Santos in the lead, Giuliano and Geraldo in the middle, and Miguel and Carla bringing up the rear. The landscape was apocalyptic, every tree reduced to a brittle skeleton, the ground covered in meters of the gray powder that they now knew was the organism's waste product, the aftermath of its consumption. But there was something new here that they hadn't seen at the boundary. The webbing was thicker, more complex, forming structures that almost looked architectural. Pillars of woven strands rose from the ground, supporting networks that stretched overhead like the roof of a cathedral. And covering everything was that bioluminescent glow, pulsing in time with the electromagnetic field. "It's beautiful," Carla whispered, and Giuliano understood what she meant. Horrifying, yes, but also beautiful in the way that all natural phenomena possess beauty, the perfect adaptation, the elegant efficiency, the raw power of life expressing itself. They pressed deeper, following the strongest electromagnetic readings. The webbing structures grew more elaborate, forming what could only be described as chambers or rooms, and in these chambers, suspended in cocoons of webbing, were animals. A deer, its body partially dissolved, nutrients being extracted slowly over what must have been weeks. A wild boar, already reduced to bone and hide. Birds, small mammals, even insects, all caught in the organism's network, all being slowly consumed. "It's farming them," Miguel said in horrified wonder. "It's not just killing and consuming immediately. It's keeping them alive, extracting nutrients over time. That's almost agricultural. Agricultural implies intelligence," Adriana pointed out. "Implies planning and resource management, which means it might be intelligent enough to communicate with," Giuliano said, trying to find hope in the horror. "Come on, we're close." They were. After another 100 meters of increasingly bizarre organic architecture, they found it, the heart of the organism. It wasn't what Giuliano had expected. No massive brain or pulsing organ, nothing overtly biological. Instead, it was a tree, or what had once been a tree. A massive kapok, probably centuries old, completely transformed. Its trunk was covered in layers of the webbing so thick it had doubled in diameter. The bioluminescence was brightest here, almost painful to look at directly. And from its roots extended thousands, maybe millions of strands, spreading out in every direction, connecting to every other part of the organism's vast network. "The neural hub," Miguel breathed. "It's using the tree's existing vascular system as a foundation, but it's added its own neural network. The original kapok is probably dead, but the organism has essentially taken over its structure and expanded it." They approached cautiously, and as they did, Giuliano felt something he had never experienced before, a presence in his mind. Not words, not quite thoughts, but impression, curiosity, recognition, and underneath it all, hunger. Not the hunger of a predator, but the hunger of something that had been starving for a very, very long time. "It's in my head," Carla gasped, dropping to her knees. "I can feel it. It's trying to communicate." "Everyone stay calm," Santos ordered, though his voice betrayed his own fear. "Don't let it." But it was too late. The organism had found a way in some electromagnetic frequency that human brains could interpret as sensation and emotion. Giuliano felt it flowing through his consciousness. Images of the forest before humans, when the Atlantic forest had stretched unbroken for thousands of kilometers. Images of abundance, of diversity, of an ecosystem in perfect balance. And then images of change. Trees falling, land being cleared, rivers being dammed, pollution spreading like cancer through soil and water. The ecosystem shrinking, fragmenting, dying by inches over decades. The organism wasn't a disease. It was trying to be a cure. "It's trying to save the forest," Giuliano said aloud, understanding flooding through him. "It's not consuming the ecosystem. It's trying to reset it, breaking down the damaged parts, storing the nutrients, preparing the ground for regeneration." "By killing everything?" Geraldo demanded. "That's not salvation, that's extinction." "It doesn't understand the difference," Miguel said, his eyes wide with revelation. "It's operating on geological timescales, evolutionary timescales. A few years of apparent death followed by centuries of regeneration. That's a acceptable trade from its perspective. It doesn't comprehend that the creatures it's consuming won't be there for the regeneration phase." "Then we have to make it understand," Giuliano said. He stepped forward, placing his hand directly on the transformed kapok's trunk. The webbing was warm, almost hot, and the moment he made contact, the presence in his mind intensified. He tried to form thoughts, tried to project concepts rather than words. Human civilization, the millions of people who depended on the forest, the cryptid species who would go extinct if their habitats were destroyed. He tried to convey the idea that the forest could be saved without killing everything in it, that humans could help, if only the organism would stop its expansion and work with them rather than against them. The response was overwhelming. A flood of sensation and information that nearly broke Giuliano's mind. He saw the organism's origin, not evolution but creation, engineered by some intelligence long before humans walked the earth, designed to maintain and repair damaged ecosystem. He saw its frustration at being trapped in dormancy for millennia, unable to fulfill its function while the forest deteriorated around it. And he saw its desperation now finally awakened, trying to complete its programming before the damage became irreversible. "It's not alive," Giuliano gasped, barely maintaining contact with the webbing. "Not in any sense we understand. It's a tool, a machine made of biological components. Someone created it to protect the forest, and now it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Then how do we stop it?" Santos asked, raising his weapon, though what good bullets would do against something that could regenerate from any intact section, Giuliano had no idea. "We don't stop it," Giuliano said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "We redirect it." He formed a new thought, a new concept: boundaries. He showed the organism the current remaining extent of the Atlantic forest, the protected reserves and parks, the areas where ecosystem restoration was already underway through human efforts. He proposed a partnership. The organism would limit its active digestion to areas already severely damaged by logging and development, places where natural recovery would take centuries. Humans would protect those areas, prevent redevelopment, and allow the organism to complete its regeneration cycle. In exchange, the organism would leave intact forest alone, would respect the boundaries humans set, would work with them rather than against them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Acceptance. The organism had no ego, no pride to overcome. It simply wanted to complete its function. If humans could define parameters that still allowed that function while preventing mass extinction, it would comply. Did it work? Geraldo asked. Did it agree? Giuliano released his hand from the trunk, swaying with exhaustion. "I think so, but we need to verify." They didn't have to wait long. The bioluminescence began to fade, and the electromagnetic readings started to drop. Carla checked her monitor in disbelief. "The signal is retreating. It's pulling back from the boundary areas, concentrating in the central zones." "It's listening," Miguel said in wonder. "It understood the parameters, and it's adjusting its behavior accordingly." They watched as, over the course of an hour, the organism systematically withdrew from the edges of its territory. The webbing dissolved, the gray powder was absorbed back into the network, and the skeletal trees, while still dead, were no longer being actively digested. It was creating a border, defining the areas where it would operate, respecting the limits Giuliano had communicated. "My God," Santos breathed. "It actually worked. You negotiated with a geological-scale ecosystem repair tool." "Not negotiated," Giuliano corrected. "Communicated. Gave it better parameters for its programming. It's still going to digest and regenerate the areas within its boundaries. Those sections of forest will look dead for years, maybe decades. But then ... he gestured to the transformed K-Pak, to the complex network of webbing that was now slowly contracting, condensing, becoming more organized. Then it will release stored nutrients, will seed new growth, will rebuild what was destroyed. In a century, these dead zones will be the most biodiverse, most pristine sections of the entire Atlantic forest." "And the cryptids being displaced?" Adriana asked. "The creatures losing their territories?" "We'll have to relocate them, same as we did with the Sombra dentata. It's not perfect, but it's better than extinction for both them and the organism, Doctor." Ferrer's voice crackled over their communication devices. "Field Team 7, what's your status?" "We're reading massive changes in the electromagnetic signature." "Mission successful," Giuliano reported. "The organism is cooperating." "Repeat, mission successful. We've established communication and negotiated territorial boundaries. The immediate threat is contained." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "Say that again. Did you say you negotiated with it?" "Affirmative. It's not hostile, it's confused. It's a tool trying to do its job without understanding the current ecological context. We provided that context. It's responding accordingly. Copy that. Extraction team is en route. And Senor Costa? Outstanding work. I'll need a full debrief, but outstanding work." They waited for the extraction helicopter in a clearing at the edge of the now-defined dead zone boundary. Giuliano sat on a fallen log, his mind still reeling from the contact he had made. The alien intelligence whore? Was it intelligence? More like a very sophisticated program running on biological hardware he had briefly merged with. "You know what the scariest part is?" Carla said, sitting beside him. "That organism, that tool. It's been dormant in the Atlantic forest for who knows how long. Thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands. And it only woke up now when the damage to the ecosystem reached critical levels." "You think there are others?" Geraldo asked. "More of these ecosystem repair tools dormant, waiting?" I think, Miguel said slowly, that we've only scratched the surface of what's really out there. The cryptids we've been tracking and categorizing, what if some of them are also engineered species? What if the entire Atlantic forest, hell, maybe all of Earth's old-growth forests, are more than just natural evolution? What if they were designed, maintained, protected by technologies and intelligences we've lost all record of? It was a disturbing thought, one that challenged every assumption they had made about the natural world. But Giuliano found he couldn't dismiss it. He had spent his entire adult life in the forest, had learned its secrets, had respected its power, and in one night he had discovered that those secrets went far deeper than he had ever imagined. The helicopter arrived, and they climbed aboard. As they lifted off, Giuliano looked back at the dead zone, now contained, now purposeful rather than destructive. In a few decades it would be verdant again, teeming with life, a testament to the fact that destruction and regeneration were sometimes two parts of the same process. When they returned to SDCR headquarters, they found Dr. Ferreira waiting with unexpected news. "You've been offered a promotion," he said, after their lengthy debrief. "Director of Cryptid Conservation and Ecosystem Management. You'd be overseeing all SDCAR operations in the Atlantic Forest region with particular focus on managing the organism you just made contact with. The pay is substantial, the resources nearly unlimited, and the importance of the work... He gestured at the satellite imagery showing the now stabilized dead zones. "Well, you've seen firsthand what's at stake." Giuliano looked at his friends, Geraldo exhausted but proud, Santos still processing the fact that they had survived, Carla already planning research projects into the organism's regenerative capabilities. They had become a team, a unit that functioned with the kind of coordination that came from shared danger and shared purpose. But then he thought of Isabella waiting at home, of Rex, Lua, and Trovao, of the simple life of hunting wild boar and sitting on his porch at sunset watching the forest breathe. "I'll do it," he said, surprising himself. "But on one condition, I work flexible hours. I need to be home with my daughter regularly, not just for her sake, but for mine. This work, as important as it is, can't be my whole life." Dr. Ferreira smiled. "Agreed. You've earned the right to set your own terms." 3 months later, Giuliano stood at the edge of the dead zone, now officially designated as the Atlantic Forest Regeneration Preserve, watching as the first survey team ventured in to document the organism's progress. The webbing had formed new structures, more organized and purposeful now that it understood its parameters. In some areas it had even begun to show signs of new growth, tiny shoots of vegetation emerging from the gray soil, seeded by the organism from its stored genetic bank. It would take decades to see the full results of the regeneration. But for the first time since European colonization had begun fragmenting the Atlantic forest, there was hope. Real, tangible hope that the ecosystem could not just survive, but thrive, could recover from centuries of damage and become something even more resilient than before. Isabella stood beside him, having insisted on seeing the preserve herself. She'd been angry when she learned the full truth of what her father had been doing, angry that he had taken such risks. But she had also been proud, and now she was studying ecology at university, determined to be part of the solution. "It's hard to believe this will all be green again someday," she said, looking at the skeletal forest. "Nature is patient," Giuliano replied. "It works on timescales we can barely comprehend. All we can do is try to help, to not make things worse, and to protect what's left." Rex, Lua, and Trovao explored the boundary area, staying clear of the actual dead zone but fascinated by its strange scent. They had aged noticeably in the past months, especially Trovao, but they were still healthy, still vital, still reminding Giuliano every day why the work mattered. His phone buzzed. A message from Geraldo. "New cryptid sighting in Piranha. Possible Class B, but readings are weird. Wanna take lead on this one?" Giuliano smiled and typed back, "Not today. Taking my daughter hiking. You handle it. I'll consult remotely if needed." He pocketed the phone and turned to Isabella. "How about we skip the preserve tour and just do some regular hiking? Maybe catch some fish for dinner." "That sounds perfect, Papa." They walked back to his truck, dogs bounding ahead, and drove to one of the intact sections of forest areas that would now be protected, that would never become dead zones because the organism had been given sufficient territory elsewhere to complete its regeneration cycle. As they hiked through the green, living forest, listening to bird calls and insect buzz, Giuliano thought about that night months ago when the forest had called him, when the dogs had sensed something wrong and led them to an encounter that had changed everything. The forest had called him a hunter, but it had made him something more. A guardian, a bridge between worlds, someone who could move between human civilization and the wild unknown and understand both sides. It was a heavier burden than simply hunting wild boar, but it was also, he realized, exactly what he had been searching for his entire life without knowing it. A purpose that matched the scale of his love for the forest, for his daughter, for the complex web of life that made the world worth preserving. The forest would call again. There would be more mysteries, more dangers, more impossible decisions to make, but now he knew he wouldn't face them alone. He had his team at SDCAR, his friends who understood the burden, his daughter who would carry the work forward into the next generation, and he had the forest itself, ancient and patient and full of secrets, waiting to teach him, challenge him, and remind him why some things were worth any sacrifice to protect. That night, as the forest called the hunter home, the dog sensed not danger but peace. And Giuliano answered that call with gratitude, knowing that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The story that began in terror and mystery ended not with neat closure but with hope and purpose. The dead zones remained, but they were no longer spreading death. They were incubating rebirth. The cryptids were still there, still hidden, still mysterious, but they had allies now who would protect them, who would help them adapt to a changing world rather than simply hunting them to extinction. And Giuliano Costa, the hunter who became a guardian, stood between two worlds, keeping watch, maintaining balance, and proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to kill what you don't understand, but to try to understand it. The Atlantic forest breathed on, its secrets safe for another generation. And somewhere in its green depths, beneath the soil and webbing in ancient trees, the organism slept and worked, patiently rebuilding what had been broken, preparing for the day when these scars would heal and the forest would be whole again. It was enough. It had to be enough. And for Giuliano, finally, it was.